Hello, it's me again. Today I'm going to talk to you about a case study around pesticides. Now, pesticides are used to prevent, to destroy or control harmful organisms such as pests. We talk about herbicides, fungicides, insecticides. All of these are pesticides, and they are commonly used for hundreds of years, although quite a lot of pesticides have also been developed recently. And their consumption, when we look at how farmers are using them, it's broadly stable. So they're kind of a fact of life for most farmers of farming. There is a big trade dimension there. It's a big political debate around what type of pesticides can and should be used. There's always a trade-off here as well between environmental harms, such as on bees, health damages to humans, but also the advantage they provide for food production. And so the big trade question is, okay, so we come up with these decisions in the UK around what type of pesticides we allow in the UK. How should that impact our imports? How should that impact our exports? So our questions for today are, should the UK food imports have to meet the same standards as the local UK production? Should they only have the right to use the same pesticides that are allowed in the UK? And for export side, should we allow the UK to export pesticides that are banned in the UK? So the trade-off is the same. It is what we're willing to compromise in order of getting at lower prices, at greater variety of food. Is it food quality and security? Is it animal welfare? Is it the impact on the environment at home or abroad? And is it working conditions outside the UK or even inside the UK? Now, when it comes to food imports, there are three different things that are at stake here. Impact on the health. Are food imports more dangerous for us than local food? Impact on the environment. Are food imports going to be more environmentally damaging than local food? And also, finally, from the economics perspective, would food imports actually, if they're not done to our standards, provide an unfair advantage for our farmers' competitors? This was discussed in week 2. We talked about how perhaps, the trade deal for Australia was perhaps good for business, but bad for farmers. And one of the key things that comes up when you look at how environmental groups, but also the NFU are reacting to this deal is they talk about 70 pesticides being banned in the UK that are in use in Australia. Now, that raised a lot of concerns. And it's true that if we look at pesticides in food, we can see that Australia is allowing not only many more pesticides, but at a much higher level. So, for example, this table, what it tells you is that for each line, you've got a different pesticide, and each column you have either the UK EU standard, the US, Australia, and international standard. So, for example, for this one, what we have is basically insect growth regulator, buprenorphine. You have 300 times more amount allowed by international standards that are followed in Australia and US compared to what is allowed in the UK and the EU. Now, should we be worried about this? If we look at what the Food Standards Agency says and Food Standards Scotland, their advice on that UK-Australia trade deal is, don't worry. We are keeping our same food safety, food standards. If something, there are some rates of pesticides that are tolerated in the UK that we call that residues at the maximum level. And if it's, people wanting to sell in the UK know these are the maximum level. Now, the problem with this is how do we check things, right? We're not checking every container of oranges coming into the UK for whether they have too much pesticides or not. Instead, how we check for pesticides in the UK is through the Expert Committee on Pesticides Residue in Food, the PRIF. And there's a risk-based approach. They only test things in the market, different products every year. Around 3,000 samples checked between GB and NI. Now, if we look at the GB numbers, they tell us quite interesting things. First, they've got two tables, like two pies. One is about food that is from outside the UK. One is from food from inside the UK. That food from outside the UK, you had 4% versus 2% here, that is residues above maximum level. So you have twice as many pieces of food and examples from food outside the UK that have above the maximum level of residues accepted. Even if you look at the orange bit of it, which is you have some residues, even though they're at or less than the maximum level, you still have much more pesticides residues left over in food from outside the UK. And that's why there's also a lot of concerns around what we're going to get in our plates through trade. But it's not just about these residues and the direct impact on health of consumers. It's about a broader issue around competitive advantage that farmers producing to looser standards can get. It may be much cheaper for them because they can use different products to produce their food. And so that's why you have an alliance really on this between the environmental groups and the farming community. And so you've seen, for example, PAN UK, which is the lobby against pesticide in the UK, one of the environmental organizations being cited in this Farmers Weekly newspaper, so a farmers newspaper, by saying, we've got illegal pesticides residues that are ending on the plates of UK consumers. That's because we don't check at the border for them. And that means that at a time when we're asking our farmers to produce much more sustainably, they end up having this kind of very difficult competition. Now that's what happens on the import side. But let's now look at the exports. So the question for that is, should we allow pesticide exports that we've considered, are not good for the environment and not good for health in the UK? Should we allow them to be exported? You may wonder why I'm asking this question. It's because we do. The UK is actually a leader in exporting pesticides that are banned for our own consumption to the rest of the world, especially in the UK case. As you can see here from this graph, we're mostly exporting these to Asia and to mostly to the Americas. So how does that work? Well, what we're seeing is, again, very different views. So from the chemical industry or from environmental groups. From chemical industry, what they're saying, Syngenta here is saying, basically, we are a very regulated industry. Different parts of the world have different pests. And so sometimes you will have a product that is not fit for purpose in the UK system, but is considered safe and useful in another country, and we should be able to export it. The environmental group perspective on this, Vicky Hurd here from Sustain, is saying that basically it's morally wrong. These are products that we know are not, too dangerous for the environment, too dangerous for health. We've banned them here, and yet we're still exporting them for other people to use. And what matters is these import-export, they're actually connected. If you export pesticides to a country that you're going to then import food from, well, you're going to end up with these pesticides coming back to you as residues on the skin of the fruits you're going to get back. So this is what we've seen in studies done in Austria, Germany, or Switzerland, for example, where you've got loads of pesticides ending up on the skin of papayas, or in strawberries ending up in Austria with lots of 50% of the pesticides that they found were actually banned in the EU. So to conclude, what's the trade-off? What are the questions for you to take to the discussion? What are you willing as a consumer, as a citizen, to compromise on for lower price and greater variety of food products? Is it food quality and security, the impact on human health? Is it animal welfare or the impact on the environment? Is it that impact here, water in the UK, or is it deforestation abroad? Is it working conditions outside of the UK? What happens to workers if they use banned pesticides outside of the UK? Or is it the negative impact on UK industry being undercut by producers in other countries producing at lower standards? And that's all for us on pesticides. Thank you so much for watching the video.